Sarah agreed to one blind date with a struggling single father, wearing a worn jacket and driving an old car, never knowing that the gentleman who nervously ordered the cheapest item on the menu was actually James Reynolds, the billionaire CEO who'd spent the last year being pursued by gold diggers and social climbers. She never suspected that his humble apartment was a temporary rental, that his rusty vehicle was borrowed, or that this was a test, his last attempt to find someone who could love him for who he was, not what he had. What she couldn't have known, as she reached across that coffee shop table to touch his hand, was that her simple act of kindness would unravel his carefully constructed disguise and change both their lives forever. Before I continue the story, please subscribe. I need to reach 1,000 subscribers so I can keep bringing you stories like this every day. It's just one click for you, but it means a lot to me. Thank you. She agreed to one blind date with a struggling single father, wearing a worn jacket and driving an old car, never knowing that the gentleman who nervously ordered the cheapest item on the menu was actually James Reynolds, the billionaire CEO who had spent the last year being pursued by gold diggers and social climbers. She never suspected that his humble apartment was a temporary rental, that his rusty vehicle was borrowed, or that this was a test, his last attempt to find someone who could love him for who he was, not what he had. What she could not have known, as she reached across that coffee shop table to touch his hand, was that her simple act of kindness would unravel his carefully constructed disguise and change both their lives forever. Sarah Mitchell woke that morning to the sound of her neighbor's baby crying through the thin walls of her apartment. The same as every morning for the past 3 years, she stretched in her modest bed, the springs creaking beneath her, and watched the early light filter through curtains she had sewn herself from discount fabric. The apartment was small, just enough for one person. But she had made it warm with second-hand furniture and plants that crowded every available surface. She was 32 years old, an elementary school teacher who spent her own money on supplies her students needed, who stayed late to tutor children who struggled, who knew every name and every story. Her bathroom mirror reflected a woman who looked tired, kind eyes that had seen disappointment but refused to grow hard. She thought of David as she brushed her teeth, the way she still did some mornings even though it had been 2 years. He had left her for a woman who summered in the Hamptons, who wore designer labels, who never had to check her bank account before ordering dinner. "You are sweet, Sarah," he had said, "but I need someone who can keep up with my lifestyle." The words still stung like a paper cut that never quite healed. She had sworn off dating after that, had built walls around her heart brick by careful brick. But Rachel would not let her hide forever. Her best friend called every week, sent her profiles of eligible men, reminded her that one man's shallowness did not define her worth. Just one more try, Rachel had pleaded the night before. Just one. Rachel appeared at her classroom door that afternoon, with 2 coffees and a smile that meant trouble. Sarah knew that smile, had learned to recognize it over 15 years of friendship, the way it promised hope and chaos in equal measure. They sat in the tiny teacher's lounge, surrounded by the smell of old coffee and construction paper, and Rachel slid a napkin across the table with a name and phone number scrawled in purple ink. "I already set it up," Rachel said, her voice bright with determination. "Tomorrow night, 7 o'clock, that little coffee shop on Maple Street." Sarah felt her stomach drop. That familiar mixture of longing and dread that came whenever someone dangled the possibility of romance before her. She pushed the napkin back across the table, shaking her head. "Rachel, I told you I am done with this. I am happy alone." But Rachel was relentless. Had been relentless since the day Sarah had shown up at her door crying over David. Mascara streaked and heart shattered. "He is a nice guy, Sarah. A really nice guy. Single dad. Works hard, just trying to make ends meet and raise his daughter right. He is not like David. He is not looking for arm candy or a trophy. He just wants someone real." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Someone real. Sarah felt something crack inside her chest, that carefully maintained armor she had built. She wanted to believe it was possible, wanted to believe that somewhere out there was a man who would see her. Truly see her, and choose her anyway. But the memory of David's office rose unbidden in her mind, the way he had barely looked up from his computer as he ended their relationship, as casual as canceling a subscription. "You deserve better than struggling, Sarah. Do not you want nice things?" She had wanted him, had thought that was enough. Rachel reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "One date, if it is awful. I will never ask again. I promise." Sarah looked at her friend, saw the genuine care there, the desperate hope that Sarah might find what Rachel herself had found with her husband Tom. She thought about going home to her empty apartment, about another evening of grading papers and reheating leftovers, about the way her students sometimes asked if Miss Mitchell had a boyfriend. "Fine," she heard herself say. One date. That evening she stood before her closet, such as it was, and pulled out her nicest dress, a simple navy blue number she had bought on sale 3 years ago. She paired it with the pearl earrings her grandmother had left her, the only jewelry she owned that felt special. In the mirror, she looked presentable, pretty even, but not extraordinary. She wondered what he would think of her, this single father who worked hard and struggled. She wondered if she was setting herself up for heartbreak again. James Reynolds woke that same morning in a penthouse that overlooked the city like a kingdom spread before a lonely king. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the sunrise, painting his bedroom in shades of gold and amber. But he barely noticed the beauty anymore. His phone buzzed with messages before his eyes fully opened, his assistant confirming meetings, his CFO sending quarterly reports, his lawyer requesting signatures on documents worth millions. He showered in marble and dressed in suits that cost more than most people's monthly rent, and felt nothing but the familiar weight of emptiness pressing against his chest. The reflection in his bathroom mirror showed a man who had everything and nothing at all. He was 36 years old, controlled a tech empire worth billions, employed thousands, and could not remember the last time someone had touched him with genuine affection. His wife Catherine had been gone for 3 years now, taken by cancer that moved through her body like wildfire, despite the best doctor's money could buy. He had held her hand as she slipped away, had whispered promises to take care of their daughter, had felt his heart crack open and never quite close again. Emma found him in his office that morning, 7 years old, with her mother's eyes and his stubborn chin. "Daddy, why do you always look so sad?" she asked, crawling into his lap with the fearlessness of childhood. He held her close, breathed in the scent of her strawberry shampoo, and had no answer that would make sense to a child. The women he had tried to date after Catherine all blurred together into one disappointment after another. They wanted his penthouse, his cars, his black cards, and his connections. They laughed too loud at jokes that were not funny, touched his arm with calculated timing, asked about his portfolio before asking about his daughter. One had actually Googled his net worth on their first date, had not even bothered to hide her phone screen. He had gone home that night and stared at Catherine's photograph for hours, wondering if he would ever feel anything real again. The idea came to him slowly, desperately, born from loneliness, and the faint hope that somewhere in this city was a woman who could love a man rather than a bank account. He would strip away everything that defined him in the world's eyes. He would become ordinary, unremarkable, just another struggling single father trying to make it work. He borrowed his building manager's old car, rented a modest apartment in a middle-class neighborhood under a false name, bought clothes from thrift stores that hung on his frame like costumes. When Rachel, his secretary's sister, mentioned she had a friend who might be perfect for a blind date, he had said yes before he could talk himself out of it. Emma watched him change clothes that evening, confusion written across her small face. "Why are you wearing those old clothes, Daddy?" "Because, sweetheart," he said, kneeling to her level, "sometimes people need to see who we really are inside, not what we look like outside." He kissed her forehead and headed toward a coffee shop on Maple Street, toward a woman named Sarah who knew nothing about James Reynolds, the CEO, and everything was about to change. The coffee shop on Maple Street was the kind of place that felt lived in. Warm light spilling from vintage Edison bulbs, mismatched furniture that looked like it had been collected from estate sales over decades, and the rich smell of espresso hanging in the air like a promise. Sarah arrived 15 minutes early because nerves made her punctual, claimed a small table near the window where she could watch the street, and tried to calm the flutter in her chest that felt like birds taking flight. She smoothed her navy dress for the 100th time, touched her grandmother's pearls like a talisman, and wondered if she was making a terrible mistake. The door opened with a soft chime, and she looked up to see a man hesitating in the doorway, scanning the room with uncertain eyes. He wore a jacket that had seen better years, the cuffs frayed and the color faded from too many washings. His jeans were clean but worn thin at the knees, and his shoes carried the scuffed evidence of hard use. But it was his face that caught her, held her, made her breath catch somewhere between her lungs and her throat. Kind eyes, the color of warm honey, set in a face that carried the weight of someone who had known loss but refused to let it destroy him. He was handsome in an understated way, the kind of handsome that grew on you slowly, and when he spotted her and offered a tentative smile, Sarah felt something shift inside her chest. "Are you Sarah?" he asked, approaching the table with the nervous energy of a man who was not sure he belonged. She nodded, stood, shook his hand, and felt calluses against her palm. "James," he said, "it is really nice to meet you." They sat, and the awkwardness descended like fog, thick and uncomfortable, neither quite sure how to begin. A barista appeared, and James ordered just a black coffee, nothing else. And Sarah saw the way his eyes flickered to the menu board with its prices listed in careful chalk. She felt something twist in her heart. Recognition, perhaps, the understanding of someone counting dollars and making difficult choices. "Get something to eat," she insisted gently. "The muffins here are amazing. Really." "I am fine," he protested. But she was already ordering 2 blueberry muffins and another coffee for herself, overriding his objections with the kind of firm kindness she used on reluctant students. They talked slowly at first, carefully, like people testing ice before walking across a frozen lake. He told her he worked as a manager at a small firm, nothing fancy, that the hours were long and the pay was modest. She told him about teaching, about the children who stole her heart every September and broke it every June when they moved on. He asked about her favorite books, and she asked about his daughter, and when he spoke about Emma, his whole face transformed, lit from within by a love so pure it made Sarah's throat tight. "My daughter is everything," he said simply. And Sarah believed him. James spoke about single parenthood the way other men might describe climbing mountains, with exhaustion and pride tangled together inseparably. "Some mornings I burn breakfast and we are running late and Emma cannot find her favorite stuffed rabbit. And I think I cannot do this for one more day," he said, stirring his coffee slowly. "But then she looks at me with those eyes, you know, and says, 'Daddy, you are doing great.' And somehow I make it through." Sarah felt her heart crack open just a little, felt the walls she had built start to crumble. She told him about the little boy in her class who came to school hungry, how she kept granola bars in her desk and pretended the school provided them so he would not feel ashamed. She told him about the girl who struggled with reading, how they stayed after school 3 days a week, how the child's face had lit up last month when she finally finished her first chapter book. "Teaching does not pay much," Sarah admitted, surprised at her own honesty. "I buy supplies with my own money, stay late without overtime, take work home every night. But when a child finally understands something they have been struggling with, when their whole face lights up with that aha moment, it makes everything worth it." James looked at her across the table and something passed between them. A recognition of kindred spirits, of people who measured wealth in moments rather than money. He did not comment on her modest dress or ask what kind of car she drove, or wonder why a woman her age was not further ahead in life. He simply smiled and said, "You must be an amazing teacher." The conversation flowed easier then, like a river finding its course. They discovered they both loved old movies, the kind filmed in black and white with dialogue that crackled. They both hated cooking but did it anyway because someone had to. They both lay awake some nights, wondering if they were doing enough, being enough, giving enough. Sarah told him about the time she had accidentally locked herself in the supply closet at school, how the janitor had not found her for 2 hours, how she had reorganized every shelf out of pure boredom. James laughed, really laughed, the sound rich and genuine, and told her about Emma putting his phone in the freezer because she thought it needed to cool down. The coffee shop filled and emptied around them, and neither noticed. 2 hours passed like 20 minutes. When James finally checked his watch, surprise flickered across his face. "I should get back," he said reluctantly. "My neighbor is watching Emma, and I promised I would not be too long." But he made no move to leave, and neither did Sarah, both of them suspended in the moment, unwilling to let it end. James's phone shattered the moment with its sharp ring, and Sarah watched his face shift from contentment to concern in an instant. He glanced at the screen, and his jaw tightened. "I am so sorry. I have to take this." His voice, when he answered, was gentle but worried. "Mrs. Patterson? Is everything okay?" Sarah could not hear the other side of the conversation, but she could read his body language, the way his shoulders tensed, the way his free hand raked through his hair. Emma had a nightmare and was asking for him. The babysitter, an elderly neighbor, sounded frazzled and apologetic. James stood abruptly, already reaching for his worn jacket. "I am so sorry, Sarah. I have to go. My daughter, she needs me." The apology in his eyes was genuine, the conflict clear, torn between wanting to stay and needing to be a father. Sarah did not hesitate. "Can I come with you? Maybe I can help." She saw surprise flash across his face. Then uncertainty. "You do not have to do that. I know it is a strange first date, and I completely understand if you want to just call it a night." But Sarah was already standing, already gathering her purse. "I work with children every day. If she is scared, maybe having someone else there will help distract her. Besides," she added with a smile that felt braver than she felt, "I would like to meet her." They drove in his borrowed car, the engine making concerning noises at every stoplight, to a neighborhood not unlike Sarah's own. Modest houses lined streets with cracked sidewalks, children's bikes left in yards, the ordinary landscape of working families making ends meet. Mrs. Patterson met them at the door of a small house with peeling paint, an older woman with kind eyes and guilt written across her weathered face. "I am so sorry, James. She just woke up crying for you." Emma sat on a worn couch, clutching a stuffed rabbit, her face blotchy from tears, her small body trembling. She looked up when James entered and launched herself at him with the desperate trust of childhood. "Daddy, I had a bad dream." James scooped her up, held her close, murmured reassurances into her hair with such tenderness that Sarah felt tears prick her own eyes. "It is okay, sweetheart. Daddy is here." Emma peeked over her father's shoulder at Sarah with curious, red-rimmed eyes. "Who is that?" "This is my friend Sarah," James said softly. "She came to make sure you are okay. Is that all right?" Emma studied Sarah with the serious consideration only children possess, then nodded slowly. Sarah crouched down to her level and smiled. "I like your rabbit. What is his name?" "Mr. Hopscotch." Emma whispered. "That is a wonderful name," Sarah said. "Does he like adventures?" Within minutes, Sarah had Emma talking about school, about her teacher, about the project she was working on. "We are supposed to read a book about friendship and do a report," Emma said, her voice gaining confidence. "But the library did not have the one I wanted. Charlotte's Web." Sarah felt her heart swell. "I have that book. It is one of my favorites. Would you like to borrow my copy?" Emma's eyes went wide with hope and disbelief. "Really?" James started to protest, his pride visible in the set of his shoulders. "Sarah, you do not have to do that. We can find it at the library eventually." But Sarah was already pulling out her phone, already texting her roommate to locate the book on her shelf at home. "I insist. Every child should be able to read Charlotte's Web when they want to. Besides," she added, looking at Emma with genuine warmth, "you can visit my classroom sometime and see all the other books I have. Would you like that?" Emma nodded enthusiastically, and James felt something break open inside him, some locked door he had not realized he was guarding. They walked to his temporary apartment building, a 3-story structure with chipped concrete steps and a flickering hallway light. James felt shame creep up his neck as he unlocked the door to the sparse furnished space, so different from the home he actually provided for Emma. The apartment held the bare minimum: a couch that sagged in the middle, a small television on a rickety stand, a kitchen table with mismatched chairs. But Sarah walked in without a flicker of judgment in her eyes, simply smiled, and asked Emma to show her where she did her homework. They settled at that wobbly table, and Sarah helped Emma sound out difficult words, praised her drawings in the margins of her notebook, made learning feel like play. James stood in the doorway of his own temporary kitchen and watched them. This teacher and his daughter, heads bent together over worksheets, and felt tears burn behind his eyes. Every woman he had dated in the past 3 years had recoiled at the mention of his daughter, had seen Emma as an inconvenience or obstacle. They had suggested nannies and boarding schools, had changed the subject whenever he spoke about parenthood. But Sarah leaned into Emma's world like it was exactly where she wanted to be, and James realized with startling clarity that this was what he had been searching for. Not someone who tolerated his daughter, but someone who celebrated her. This was different. This was real. This was everything he had hoped to find when he put on these worn clothes and borrowed this car. This was why he had taken the risk. The week that followed felt different to Sarah, colored by something she had almost forgotten how to name. Hope. Her phone buzzed with messages from James throughout the days, simple things that somehow meant everything. Good morning texts that included pictures Emma had drawn, questions about her favorite flowers, stories about his daughter's latest adventures. She found herself smiling at her phone during lunch breaks, typing responses between lesson plans, feeling like a teenager again but wiser, more cautious, more aware of how precious this feeling was. When James asked if she wanted to meet at Riverside Park on Saturday, she said yes before even checking her calendar. "It is nothing fancy," he had written, clearly apologetic. "Just thought we could have a picnic if the weather holds. Bring comfortable shoes." Sarah arrived to find him spreading a blanket on the grass near the playground, a cooler beside him that had clearly seen many summers. Emma ran to greet her with the enthusiasm of a child who had decided Sarah was safe, was good, was someone worth loving. "Look what I brought," Emma announced, pulling drawings from her backpack with pride. "I made this one for you." It was a crayon portrait of 3 stick figures holding hands, labeled Daddy, Me, and Miss Sarah. James had made sandwiches, simple peanut butter and jelly cut into triangles, and brought apple slices in plastic containers. It was humble, and it was perfect. They ate on the blanket while Emma chattered about everything and nothing, her voice a constant stream of consciousness that made them both laugh. After lunch, Sarah played tag with Emma across the grass, her navy dress be damned, running and shrieking with genuine joy. James watched them from the blanket and felt his chest constrict with an emotion so powerful it almost hurt. This was what Catherine would have wanted for Emma. For him, this lightness, this laughter, this life. When they finally collapsed back on the blanket, breathless and happy, Sarah told them about growing up in a small apartment with 3 siblings, about Christmas mornings with homemade gifts, about her mother making magic out of nothing. "Money was tight," she said softly, "but love was not. We were rich in all the ways that mattered." James reached across the blanket and took her hand, and Emma curled up between them. And the 3 of them watched clouds drift across the sky. This, James thought, this is everything. The connection between them had deepened into something undeniable, something that felt like family. October brought cold that cut through thin fabric like knives, and James mentioned casually over the phone one evening that he was waiting for his next paycheck to get Emma a proper winter coat. The one from last year no longer fit, and he had been layering her in sweaters. But she needed something warmer. His voice carried embarrassment and resignation, the sound of a father doing his best with limited resources. Sarah said she understood, said not to worry, but her mind was already working. It was coincidence, or fate, that Emma attended the elementary school right next to Sarah's, that their colleague, Miss Henderson, taught Emma's 2nd grade class. Sarah saw Emma on the playground during recess 2 days later, watched the little girl shiver in her thin jacket, while other children ran in puffy coats and warm gloves. Something fierce and protective rose in Sarah's chest. She went to the department store that afternoon and spent money she had been saving for new tires on a purple winter coat with a warm hood, size 7, the kind that would keep a child safe through the harshest winter. She bought matching gloves and a scarf, spent more than she should have. Felt not one moment of regret. On Friday, she arrived at James's apartment with the coat in a donation bag, her face carefully casual. "The school had some donated winter clothes come in," she said, handing the bag to Emma. "Your teacher thought this might fit you. Want to try it on?" Emma pulled out the purple coat with wonder, slipped it on, and spun in circles. "It fits perfect, Daddy! Look!" But James was looking at Sarah, and his eyes held something complex and breaking. "Sarah," he said quietly after Emma ran to her room to find her rabbit to show him the coat, "you did not have to do this." "It was donated to the school," Sarah insisted, but her voice wavered under his gaze. James stepped closer, close enough that she could see the tears gathering in his eyes. "No one has donated a brand new coat with the tag still on it in the exact size my daughter needs. Sarah, this is too much." "It is not too much," she said fiercely. "Every child deserves to be warm. Emma deserves to be warm." He reached for her hand and held it between both of his, and for a moment his carefully constructed facade almost crumbled entirely. In that moment he wanted to tell her everything, wanted to confess that he could buy his daughter 1,000 coats, that he was lying about who he was, but what stopped him was the realization blazing through him like wildfire. He was falling in love with her. Not despite her kindness, but because of it. Not despite her sacrifice, but because it revealed the size of her heart. The weeks that followed wove themselves into a pattern that felt like coming home. They visited the library on Tuesday evenings, Emma choosing picture books, while James and Sarah wandered the aisles sharing favorite titles. They walked through parks on Sunday afternoons, Emma collecting leaves, and James carrying Sarah's hand in his, like something precious and fragile. They cooked dinner together in Sarah's small kitchen, the three of them laughing over burnt garlic bread and overcooked pasta, making memories out of ordinary moments. But guilt ate at James in the quiet hours. He lay awake in his temporary apartment and stared at the ceiling and felt the weight of his deception pressing against his chest like a stone. Every time Sarah insisted on splitting the check at the diner, every time she bought Emma small gifts with money she clearly could not spare, every time she looked at him with eyes full of trust and growing love, he felt the lie grow heavier. He told himself he would reveal the truth soon, after one more date, one more week, one more perfect moment. He was afraid to shatter. Sarah brought him to Rachel's house for dinner on a Friday evening, introduced him to her best friend and her husband Tom with nervous pride. They ate lasagna and garlic bread around a modest dining table, and everything was going well until Tom asked, innocently enough, what kind of work James did. "Small business management," James said, the lie practiced and smooth. "The pay is not great, but it is stable." He saw the glance that passed between Rachel and Tom, saw concern flicker across Rachel's face. Later, while the men cleared dishes, Rachel pulled Sarah into the kitchen and spoke in a low, urgent voice that Sarah heard perfectly well. "Honey, are you sure about this? He seems nice, but what about your future? What about stability?" Sarah felt anger flash hot and defensive through her veins. "He is a good man, Rachel. He is kind, and he loves his daughter, and he treats me with respect. Is that not what matters? But what if you want children together someday? What if there is an emergency? What if?" Rachel pressed. Sarah cut her off. "I spent 2 years with David and all his money, and I was miserable. James makes me happy. That is worth more than any bank account." Rachel studied her friend's face and saw conviction there, saw something deeper than infatuation. "Just be careful," she said finally. "I do not want to see you hurt again." That night, as James drove Sarah home in his borrowed car, she reached across and took his hand. "I do not care about money," she said into the darkness. "I care about you." And James felt his heart break and soar at the same time. November brought early darkness and the kind of cold that made staying inside feel like sanctuary. They had spent the evening at Sarah's apartment watching animated movies, Emma curled between them on the couch with her stuffed rabbit, her eyelids growing heavy as the credits rolled. Sarah carried the sleeping child to her bedroom and covered her with a spare blanket, smoothed hair back from her small forehead with maternal tenderness. When she returned to the living room, James had dimmed the lights and was sitting on the floor with his back against the couch, looking tired and vulnerable in a way that made Sarah's heart ache. She sat beside him, close enough that their shoulders touched, and for a long moment neither spoke. "Tell me about her," Sarah said softly. "Your wife, James was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. Then his voice came, low and rough with old grief. "Catherine, she was everything good in the world. We were happy, building a life together, and then she got sick, and no amount of hoping or praying or fighting could stop it." He paused, swallowed hard. "I held her hand at the end and promised I would take care of Emma, would give her a good life. Some days I am not sure I am keeping that promise." "You are," Sarah said fiercely. "You are an amazing father." She reached for his hand and held it tight. "I am afraid," she admitted into the quiet. "I am afraid of caring this much. My last relationship ended because I was not enough, because I could not give him the lifestyle he wanted. I am afraid that one day you will realize I am just an ordinary teacher with nothing special to offer." James turned to look at her, and his eyes held so much emotion it stole her breath. "You are everything," he whispered. "You are kind and generous, and you love my daughter like she is your own. You are everything I have been looking for." He leaned toward her, and she leaned toward him, and their lips were inches apart when Emma called out from the bedroom, "Daddy?" The moment shattered like glass. James closed his eyes, pressed his forehead to Sarah's, and they both laughed shakily. "I should get her home," he said reluctantly. But as he gathered his sleeping daughter and headed toward the door, he turned back. "Sarah, I love you. I need you to know that." She stood in her doorway and watched him leave and knew with absolute certainty that she loved him too. James drove through the dark streets and knew he could not keep lying. Not to her. Not anymore. Tomorrow he would tell her everything. The email arrived on a Monday morning, cold and bureaucratic in its language, devastating in its content. Budget cuts were forcing the district to eliminate supplementary programs across all elementary schools. Sarah's after-school reading initiative, the one she had built from nothing over 5 years, the one that served struggling students who needed extra help, would be discontinued effective January 1st. She read the words 3 times before they truly sank in, before the reality crashed over her like a wave. Her hands trembled as she scrolled through the message. Funding could potentially be secured through private donors or community fundraising, but the amount needed was substantial. $15,000 to keep the program running through the end of the school year. It might as well have been $15 million. She called James from her classroom during lunch, her voice breaking as she tried to explain. "These kids need this program. Some of them. This is the only place they get individual attention. The only place someone tells them they are smart and capable. I cannot just let it disappear." James listened to her cry and felt his chest constrict with the desperate need to fix this. To make it right. He could write a check right now, could have his assistant arrange everything, could save her program with the equivalent of pocket change. The words rose to his throat and stuck there, tangled with guilt and fear. If he helped, she would ask questions. If he revealed himself now, in the middle of her crisis, she might think he had been playing games with her heart. "I might know someone who could help," he said carefully. "A business contact who does charitable donations. Let me make some calls." "No," Sarah said immediately, fiercely. "I appreciate it, James, but this is something I need to do myself. I do not want charity. I want to earn this, to fight for it. If I can prove to the district that the community values this program enough to fund it, maybe they will find a way to sustain it long term." "But Sarah," he started. "Please," she interrupted. "I know you want to help, but I need to do this my way." James hung up and sat in his real office, surrounded by wealth and power that felt suddenly useless. He stared at his computer screen and felt torn between 2 impossible choices: tell her the truth and risk losing her, or watch her struggle when he could solve everything with a single phone call. Sarah took a job waitressing at a diner 3 nights a week, the kind of place that smelled like grease and coffee and served truckers and late shift workers until 2 in the morning. She worked her teaching job from 7 to 4, then changed in the school bathroom and drove to the diner for the 5 to midnight shift. Every dollar in tips went into an envelope marked Program Fund. Every aching foot and exhausted morning was worth it if she could save what mattered. James discovered the truth by accident 2 weeks later when he drove past the diner and saw her through the window, balancing plates and forcing smiles for customers who barely looked at her. He sat in his car and watched her work and felt his heart shatter into pieces. He could end this with a phone call. One phone call, and she would never have to work herself to exhaustion again. But the lie he had built stood between them like a wall he did not know how to scale. Emma noticed during their next visit, her small face creasing with concern. "Miss Sarah, why do you look so tired? Are you sick?" Sarah smiled and said she was fine, just busy. But James saw the shadows under her eyes, saw the way she moved like every muscle hurt. That evening, after Emma fell asleep, he tried again. "Sarah, please let me help. I can talk to people, make connections, find donors. You do not have to do this alone." She looked at him with such gentle firmness it made his throat tight. "I need to do this myself, James. I know you do not understand, but this is important to me. If I accept help every time things get hard, what does that say about my ability to fight for what I believe in? These kids deserve someone who will sacrifice for them, who will prove they are worth fighting for." He wanted to tell her she was worth fighting for, that she did not have to prove anything, that he had billions sitting in accounts while she worked herself to the bone. But the words stuck in his throat, trapped by his own deception. He had created this test to find authenticity, and now it had become a cage. He watched the woman he loved sacrifice herself for others while he sat on resources that could change everything, and he realized with devastating clarity that his carefully constructed disguise had transformed from protection into prison. He had trapped them both. It happened on a Thursday afternoon during dismissal. Sarah was walking her students to the bus line when the world tilted sideways and went dark. She woke to fluorescent lights and the smell of antiseptic, a hospital room coming into focus slowly. Her principal had called James, the emergency contact Sarah had listed, and he arrived with Emma in tow. Both of them breathless and frightened. The doctor explained with clinical detachment that Sarah had collapsed from exhaustion and dehydration, that her body had simply given out from weeks of running on empty. She needed rest, proper meals, and to stop working double shifts that were destroying her health. James sat by her bedside after the doctor left and held her hand like he was afraid she might disappear. Emma climbed carefully onto the bed and curled against Sarah's side, her small body trembling. "You scared us," the little girl whispered. In the quiet of that hospital room, with machines beeping softly and evening light fading beyond the window, Emma looked up at her father with eyes too wise for 7 years. "Daddy, do you love Miss Sarah?" James felt his breath catch. He looked at his daughter, then at Sarah lying pale and exhausted in the hospital bed, and the truth came out simple and unstoppable. "Yes, sweetheart, I love her very much." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. She reached for James with her free hand and he took it, held both her hands in his like they were made of something precious and breakable. "I love you too," she said, her voice cracking. "Both of you. I know I am not much. I know I cannot give you fancy things or an easy life, but I love you with everything I have." James felt something break inside him, felt the weight of his deception crushing his chest. "You are everything," he said roughly. "Sarah, you are everything that matters." "I do not care about money," Sarah said, the words tumbling out in a rush. "I just want you both. I want Sunday mornings and terrible cooking and Emma's drawings on my refrigerator. I want this, whatever this is. Even if we struggle. Especially if we struggle. Because at least we will be together." James looked at the woman he loved lying exhausted in a hospital bed because she had worked herself to the bone for children who were not even her own. And he knew he could not live with the lie for one more day. Tomorrow, he promised himself. Tomorrow he would tell her everything and pray she would understand. James spent Friday night rehearsing the words in his mind, pacing his real penthouse while Emma slept peacefully in her actual bedroom. He would take Sarah to dinner, somewhere quiet, and tell her everything. He would explain about the loneliness, the test, the desperate need to be loved for himself. He would show her his real life and pray she would forgive the deception. He practiced the opening line a dozen different ways, each one feeling inadequate, insufficient to bridge the gap between his lie and her truth. Meanwhile, Sarah returned to school on Monday to find her principal waiting with news that felt too good to be real. An anonymous donor had come forward over the weekend, offering to fund the entire reading program through the end of the school year. $15,000 wired directly to the school's account, with no strings attached and no name provided. Sarah stood in the office and felt relief war with suspicion in her chest. She should have been celebrating, but something felt wrong, too convenient, too perfectly timed. She thought of James mentioning business contacts, thought of his offer to help, and pushed the thoughts away. He would not go behind her back like that. He respected her independence. She was being paranoid. That afternoon she visited James at his apartment, found him making lunch for Emma with the careful concentration of someone whose mind was elsewhere. His phone rang while he was cutting sandwiches, and he stepped into the bedroom to answer it. But the door did not close completely. Sarah heard his voice change, heard him speak with an authority and confidence she had never heard before. "Yes. Reschedule the board meeting to Thursday. Tell them Mr. Reynolds will be available after 2, and have the contracts ready for my signature." She froze in the living room, Emma coloring at her feet, the words echoing strangely in her mind. Mr. Reynolds. James had said his last name was Reynolds, but the way he had spoken, the tone of command, the mention of board meetings and contracts, it did not fit with the man she knew. When he emerged from the bedroom, his face was carefully casual. "Sorry about that. Work call. Just some scheduling issues." Sarah smiled and said it was fine, but something nagged at her, a splinter working its way under her skin. She told herself she was imagining things, that exhaustion was making her paranoid, but doubt had planted its first seeds. Sarah decided to surprise James at work on Wednesday with coffee and the cookies Emma had asked her to bake. She had the address from a text he had sent weeks ago, an office building downtown where he claimed to work as a manager. She wanted to see him smile, wanted to thank him for being patient while she recovered, wanted to show him that she was thinking of him. The address led her to a gleaming tower of glass and steel that reached toward the sky like a monument to wealth and power. Reynolds Tech Industries was etched into the marble facade in letters 3 feet tall. Sarah stood on the sidewalk and stared, confusion washing over her in cold waves. This could not be right. She checked the address again. This was the building. She walked through revolving doors into a lobby that looked like something from a magazine, all marble floors and modern art, and a reception desk that probably cost more than her car. She approached the desk with the cookies clutched in her hands, feeling suddenly small and out of place. "I am looking for James Reynolds," she said to the receptionist. The woman's face lit up with professional warmth. "Of course, Mr. Reynolds. Do you have an appointment? He is in meetings most of the afternoon, but I can check if he is available." Mr. Reynolds. Sarah felt the floor shift beneath her feet. Before she could respond, the elevator doors opened and James stepped out, surrounded by people in expensive suits. But this was not the James she knew. This James wore a suit that fit him like it was made for his body alone, moved with confidence and authority, spoke in that commanding voice she had heard through the bedroom door. Employees deferred to him, called him sir, waited for his approval before speaking. She watched him from behind a marble column as he walked past a wall where his photograph hung beneath gold letters. CEO James Reynolds, founder. Sarah could not breathe, could not think, could not reconcile the man in the borrowed car and thrift store jacket with this titan of industry striding through his own building like he owned the world. He owned this building and probably a dozen others. She thought of every meal she had paid for, every gift she had bought Emma, every time she had worried about money while he watched. The hospital, the anonymous donor, the reading program. All of it clicked into place like pieces of a puzzle, revealing a picture that made her sick. She backed toward the door before he could see her, fled into the street, and felt her entire world crumble into dust. Sarah ignored 17 calls from James before she finally turned her phone off completely. She sat on her bathroom floor and cried until there were no tears left, until she felt hollowed out and empty. Rachel found her there 2 hours later, let herself in with the spare key Sarah had given her years ago, and sank down beside her friend on the cold tile. "He lied to me," Sarah whispered. "About everything. The whole time I was working myself to exhaustion, buying his daughter coats I could not afford, worrying about him struggling. He was a billionaire watching me like I was some kind of experiment. Rachel held her while she shook. Was I a game to him? Was this all just entertainment for a bored, rich man? Did he laugh about the poor teacher who fell for his act? The anonymous donor, Sarah continued, her voice breaking. It was him, was it not? He went behind my back after I specifically told him I needed to do it myself. He undermined everything I was trying to prove, made me feel like my efforts did not matter because he could just write a check and fix it all. Rachel had no answers, could only hold her friend and let her break. Everything was a lie, Sarah said. The apartment, the car, the struggling single father act. How do I know any of it was real? How do I know he actually cared or if I was just passing some test? The knock on her door came at 8 that evening. Sarah knew it was him before she opened it. Could feel his presence through the wood. James stood in the hallway still wearing his expensive suit, and Emma was with him, her small face confused and sad. Miss Sarah, why would you not answer our calls? Did we do something wrong? Sarah looked at the child she had come to love and felt her heart crack further. Then she looked at James and her face went cold. Every wall she had ever built slamming back into place. We need to talk, James said quietly. Sarah stepped aside to let them in, but her body was rigid, distant. When Emma reached to hug her, Sarah accepted it, but without the warmth the child was used to. Emma looked between the adults and sensed something terrible in the air. James asked Emma to sit on the couch and watch a video on his phone, something to distract her for a few minutes. Then he turned to Sarah and the words came tumbling out like water breaking through a dam. I am James Reynolds. I own Reynolds Tech Industries. I am a billionaire, and I have been lying to you about who I am since the night we met. Sarah stood with her arms crossed, her face a mask of ice, and said nothing. He continued, his voice rough with shame. After my wife died, I tried to date. Every woman I met saw dollar signs instead of a person. They wanted my penthouse and my cars and my money. They tolerated my daughter because she came with the package. I was so lonely, Sarah, so desperate to find someone who could love me, just me, not what I had. So I created a test. I rented that apartment, borrowed that car, pretended to be struggling. I thought if I found someone who could love me when I had nothing, then I would know it was real. His voice broke. And then I met you. Emma looked up from the couch, confusion turning to fear as she sensed the tension. Daddy, why is Miss Sarah angry? What is happening? Sarah knelt down to Emma's level, her voice gentle despite the rage burning in her chest. Sweetheart, your daddy and I need to talk about grown-up things. You did nothing wrong, okay? But Emma started crying anyway. The way children do when their world feels unstable. I do not want you to be mad at Daddy. Please, do not leave us. James pulled his daughter into his arms, but his eyes stayed on Sarah. You lied about who you were, Sarah said, her voice shaking. You watched me exhaust myself, watched me spend money I did not have on your daughter, watched me work 2 jobs to save my program, and the whole time you could have helped. You made me feel like a fool. I lied about my wallet, not my heart, James said desperately. Everything I felt was real. Every moment with you, every conversation, the way I fell in love with you, that was all real. He pulled out his phone with trembling hands and showed her a photo of a beautiful woman holding a baby. This is Catherine. This is Emma's mother. She died 3 years ago, and I have not been able to breathe properly since. That part was not a lie. My grief was real. My love for my daughter is real. My love for you is real. Sarah asked them to leave, her voice hollow and exhausted. I need time to think. Please, just go. She watched through her window as James carried a sobbing Emma to a car that probably cost more than Sarah would make in 5 years, and felt numb. The days that followed were gray and empty. She went through the motions of teaching, smiled at her students, graded papers, but inside she felt like something essential had been carved out. Rachel came over every evening, brought takeout Sarah did not eat, and listened to her talk in circles. "He made a fool of me," Sarah said on the third night. "But did he?" Rachel asked gently. "Think about it, Sarah. Every moment you spent together, was he pretending? When he talked about Emma, when he held your hand, when he told you he loved you." Sarah thought about the way he had looked at his daughter, the tenderness in his touch, the vulnerability in his eyes when he spoke about his late wife. She thought about the man who had nervously ordered coffee and smiled at her with genuine warmth. She thought about every conversation, every laugh, every moment that had felt real because it was real. "He lied about money," Rachel continued. "But you fell in love with him when you thought he had nothing. Does that not prove what you both felt was authentic? If anything, you passed his test with flying colors, and maybe, just maybe, he learned something too." On the seventh day, Sarah found herself standing outside a penthouse that overlooked the entire city. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she knocked. Emma opened the door and launched herself at Sarah with a cry of joy. "You came back! You came back!" James appeared behind his daughter, his face haggard and hopeful. "Sarah," he breathed. They sat in his living room, enormous and beautiful and nothing like the temporary apartment. And Sarah spoke first. "I fell in love with a single dad in a coffee shop who ordered the cheapest thing on the menu. I fell in love with a man who put his daughter first, who knew grief, who was kind. That man was real, was he not?" "That man was me," James said. "That is who I am, under everything else. The money does not change who I am inside. I should have told you sooner. I was afraid of losing you." Sarah reached across the space between them. "We start over. Honest this time, no more tests, no more lies. Just us." James took her hand and pulled her close, and Emma wrapped her arms around both of them. "Just us," he promised. 6 months later, Sarah stood in front of her classroom and watched 23 children bent over books, their faces bright with concentration and joy. The reading program had not just survived but flourished, transformed into a partnership between her passion and James's resources. She had learned to accept help not as charity but as collaboration, as two people building something better together than either could alone. The wedding had been small and perfect, held in the same park where they had shared sandwiches and watched clouds drift across the sky. Sarah wore a simple white dress and her grandmother's pearls. Emma had been the flower girl, scattering petals with such enthusiasm that everyone laughed. And when the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, the little girl had cheered louder than anyone. They split their time between the penthouse and a modest house Sarah had insisted on keeping because she needed a space that felt like hers, that reminded them both where they had started. Sarah still taught, still arrived early and stayed late, still spent her own money on supplies because some things were not about necessity, but about love. James had learned that authenticity could not be tested, only trusted, that protecting himself had nearly cost him everything that mattered. On this particular evening they gathered in the kitchen of the modest house. The three of them crowded around the small table where Sarah and James had once helped Emma with homework. They ate spaghetti that James had only slightly burned and laughed about their day. Emma looked up from her plate with sauce on her chin and said, "I am glad Daddy found you, Miss Sarah." "I am glad too, sweetheart," Sarah said, reaching for her hand. Sometimes the greatest love stories are not about fairy tales or perfect circumstances. They are about seeing past the surface to the heart beneath. Sarah had fallen in love with a man she thought had nothing and discovered he had everything that mattered. James had fallen in love with a woman who proved that the richest treasures cannot be bought. They had both learned that authenticity is not about what you have, but about who you are when you think no one important is watching. Love asks us to be vulnerable, to risk being seen completely, to choose connection over pride and truth over protection. In the end, what truly matters is not the size of your bank account or the car you drive, but the size of your heart and the courage to offer it honestly. If this story touched you, if it reminded you that real love sees the person, not the package, then carry that truth forward. Choose kindness. Choose authenticity. Choose to see people for who they truly are. Because somewhere out there, someone is waiting for you to look past their surface and recognize their heart.